Welcome back. Hope you all had a good lunch and caught up. Just by way of quick introduction, if anybody's wondering, Sally Wentworth from ISOC, our moderator, is ill. Her colleague, Mark Buell, has graciously agreed to step in. And no, Jamie Hedlund did not grow a beard. He is schedule conflicted, so Rodrigo de la Parra has agreed to sit in from ICANN perspective. But let me turn it over to Mark, and thank you all.
Thanks, Paul. I'm sorry. Sally sends her regrets. I know she had really wanted to be here, but things have conspired that she had to stay home. I actually missed this morning. This morning's sessions at the DNS forum. I was at another DNS-related event on the other side of town at one of the Senate buildings. I think that one may have had a little more fireworks than you had here this morning, but I expect we'll have a good discussion this afternoon. By the way, as a Canadian, I always feel that I have to apologize for Ted Cruz, but that's neither here nor there. So, the senator from Alberta, exactly. You know, at this morning's hearing, we actually heard a lot about the multi-stakeholder model, how important it is for preserving the free and open internet, how it is in large part behind the success of the internet. We also heard about how it's under threat. And, you know, since I started working in the internet governance world, that's been the one constant. The multi-stakeholder model has always been under threat. So, you know, at the same time, the internet has changed a lot since the mechanisms and the institutions that we developed for how we're governing the DNS, how we're governing the internet as a whole. They've changed a lot. The internet has become near ubiquitous. We've welcomed many people online from around the world, and we're posed to welcome many more people online over the next few years. And, you know, that tremendous growth in the internet and that radically different world that we live in now than we had in the late 90s is putting pressure on the multi-stakeholder model. And I hope through our discussion on this panel that we can shed some light on the strength of the multi-stakeholder model currently and what we can expect over the next few years. Each of the panelists on stage will have a minute to make a very brief, concise statement before we get into the discussion. At that point, I encourage all panelists to question and engage with each other, and I'll open up I'll open the session up to questions from the floor. I won't read the full bios for each of the panelists. You have them in your briefing book for the event. But we have James Bladel he's Vice President of GoDaddy, Megan Richards from the European Commission, Annabeth Lang from .no, and Jamie Hedlund is not here, but we have a very good stand-in. So with that, I'll pass it over to James, and please go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Mark. James Bladel, and just for a quick minute, I'm Vice President Policy at GoDaddy, a registrar, maybe you've heard of us, as well as a web host and a platform for small and aspiring small businesses. And I guess the subject of this panel is engagement in the multi-stakeholder process. And I assume we're talking about ICANN, but there are a number of other models that are starting to come into being alongside of ICANN that we also engage in. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities of participating and engaging in these processes from the perspective of a commercial enterprise, including a public company, sticking your neck out there when you're already under a microscope, and what that means in terms of participation. I think I'll just maybe end it there, and then we can kind of save more time for the exchange. I have a story as well. It's not as good as Christian's comic book story, but we can save that perhaps for the back and forth in the Q&A.
And Megan?
Thanks. I'm, excuse me, Megan Richards. I was also spending some time with the Canadians on the Hill today, which was quite interesting. I'm here because I have nothing to do with the technical side of the internet, you'll be pleased to know, but I am very much involved in internet governance. And something that I say quite often, especially this gets technical, people very hot under the collar. I think that internet governance in the last few years and in the future will become more and more interesting and attractive, and the space will be more and more occupied by governments, policymakers, etc. And I know that makes many of you very nervous, but you have to face it, and we have to all work together, and the multi-stakeholder model includes everyone, and of course governments too, and they're important partners in all of this. But one thing I think is very important too, and that is the participation of the technical community in all these discussions. And I'm very much in favor of, excuse me, what we call evidence-based policy making. And it drives me crazy when I hear some of the things, for example, that I heard on the Hill today, which have no basis whatsoever in fact, reality, etc. So I think you have a very important role to play in making sure that the facts are on the table, the evidence is there, and you can show what the reality is. And then those of us who are in policy-related issues or civil society or other areas can take that into consideration and make sure that we have all the elements to work with.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm from a really small registry, Norway, but I've been involved in this for several years now. So I started with the government in 2000 and worked with the GAC for 7 years before I changed to the registry. So I've seen both sides of the table and seen all the processes that's been out there, from the VESIS process and the fight to do something with what we thought worked very well. And Norway has always been of the opinion that it's not the way to rule internet, to regulate the internet. We wouldn't have been where we are today, and the importance of internet is so huge that we shouldn't destroy what we have made through these years. So when they say that it's difficult or the HANA transition makes problems for what we have today, what we should think about is the problems that we will have if we don't make that transition. It's still people out there and still forces that want something else. So it's up to us and up to our community to work together and cooperate as strongly as we can with each other. And for us, since we are such a small country and a little registry, we have to prioritize who to work with, where to use our resources. We work very closely with the government on Internet Governance Forum because we can't do it alone, and they need us. And we try to support the way they work with Internet governance. We are active in center. We think that the regional organizations perhaps are even more important for those small countries that can't afford to go to ICANN. You have to do it through your regional organizations. And it's important from our point of view also to support the academy or academia to do something with the research, to get new people, new students to be interested in what we know and share the long experience most of the people sitting here have. And as Megan says, to give them the right background to say their opinions and not say a lot of nonsense. That's not true, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not Jamie Hedlund, as you can tell. My name is Rodrigo de la Parra. I work for ICANN. I'm Vice President for Stakeholder Engagement for Latin America and the Caribbean. So as you can tell from the title, engagement is a key part of ICANN's role in trying to make the multi-stakeholder model more representative, more well-distributed, and pretty much along these lines, tried everybody to come and participate. So I think I could add a very nice and special ingredient to this discussion in terms of engaging stakeholders from a developing region not only in economic terms, but also in terms of the historic participation in ICANN, right? So I hope to to share with you these ideas and part of the work that we do, because engagement is indeed a critical part for any exercise of internet governance who has the multi-stakeholder model behind it. As you know, after the WSIS, the WSIS in Geneva and in Tunisia, the documents pretty much stated as principles that internet governance discussions should be made in a multi-stakeholder fashion, with other words, right? But this is key for that. And showing and sharing with all of you that participate actively in ICANN, I think it's going to be an interesting ingredient for this discussion. So looking forward.
Thank you. It raises two questions in my mind. And first, James, you had mentioned that there are many fora where these discussions take place. It's not just ICANN, although right now we have a lot of focus on ICANN. And Megan, you had said that we have to expect increased involvement from governments in these fora. Are the current structures that are in place able to accommodate that increased government participation?
You go first, and I will contest what you say.
Okay, perfect. So then I'll tee it up for you, and you can hit it out of the park. Yeah, I think that we're still feeling our way a little bit in that, and I say this as someone who's only been participating in ICANN not as long as a number of folks in this room, for about maybe 8 to 9 years. I've seen the increasing role and influence of the GAC. In particular, and government participation within the GAC. And not only at the level, I think, that is understood to be the role of the GAC in advising the board, but also in other levels and cross-community working groups, which has come up in the last couple of years, and even weighing in on matters of policy development within groups like the GNSO. So I think there's this perception, or maybe a reality, that government influence and participation or engagement, as Rodrigo might say, is expanding, perhaps even beyond what was anticipated originally by the GAC and into some of these other areas. I think that it is appropriate for the GAC to exist in one of those, which is to advise the board. I think it's appropriate for individual GAC members to engage in, for example, GNSO policy development, which is open to everyone in the community, and we would encourage members from the GAC and from public sectors to encourage in that. But I think where I do get a little nervous is when I see governments collectively engaging or weighing in on issues that are underway, either in policy development or coming recently out of policy development. I think that's probably just a matter of nuance, but it does seem to me it's like there's a role for governments to act collectively, and then maybe a role for governments to act individually. And I think maybe we're commingling them a little bit, if that made any sense.
Well, I'll come back to what you said about collective and individual governments and how they work in ICANN. Because ICANN is only one of the fora, and I think it's an important one, and the GAC, of course, has an important role there. For some reason, my voice is gone. I don't know. Maybe it's the microphone. But there are many other fora, and it's clear that governments have a particular and increasing interest in policy making in the internet sphere. I'm going to call it internet writ large, because the digital economy is becoming more and more important. More and more their citizens are going online. The internet, by its very nature, is more and more important to citizens all over the world, and becoming even more important, luckily, to also in developing countries, etc. So that it's absolutely normal and natural that governments and governmental organizations have an interest in these things. Now, where and how they work, again, it depends on the forum. I don't see a large role for governments in the IETF, for example. That doesn't mean that they should necessarily be excluded. I don't see, there are probably some governmental people even going to IETF meetings. I know one of my colleagues goes to an IETF meeting because he's interested in standards and looking at these things. So I don't think there's anywhere where anyone should be excluded. It's a question of what we call in the European Union, you'll like this, variable geometry. In other words, in the IETF, governmental contribution and participation should be probably de minimis, not excluded, but de minimis, whereas in the GAC, it should be much larger. But that's not to say that in the GAC, principles and policies and advice should be developed out of the blue. It really has to be formed and developed based on technical priorities, the facts, evidence, etc. So that brings me back to your ICANN comment, and that is the GAC clearly has a role, and this is in the bylaws, of course, and in the revised bylaws, on how it presents its advice and gives its advice to the ICANN board. That's one thing. But I think also it's very important that government participants participate also in the community process. They're part of the community too, and in policy development, they have an important role to identify, oh, that's a potential public policy issue. It doesn't mean that this is the answer to it, but be careful, here is something that may create problems for future policy. So I think that's an important role too. So I don't see that they can be excluded. So the GAC is, and its advice to the board is one particular aspect, but I think many other contributions are also possible. That's probably enough.
So it sounds like we're in agreement then, that participation.
Well, you talked about, you said that the GAC shouldn't participate collectively in other fora except in the GAC, but it doesn't.
No, I'm sorry.
Because it
I meant
doesn't participate
participating individually within policy development at ICANN, but collectively through the GAC and its advice to the board.
That's the only way it can participate collectively, I think, because you'll never get GAC consensus on anything else usually, except in its advice to the board and in perhaps in some public comment periods. For example, we have some public comments which go out and the GAC is asked to make a comment. By definition, the whole GAC has to be consulted on that.
Excellent. Annabeth, I think you have a comment?
Yes, a little comment. I think that GAC has developed immensely through the years. Since when I started, they locked themselves, or I was among them, inside a room and sat the whole night, and we were not part of the community at all. And it has been much closer to the ICANN thought, to the ICANN world, and they feel that ICANN is part of them much more than they did when they started. And I think it will gain all of us if the governments feel that they are part of this multi-stakeholder world, since we know that we have pressure from other worlds, and they can always skip us and go to other places where they would perhaps try to regulate and make a different model that we wouldn't like to see develop. But I agree with both James and Megan that they should act in the way that we have decided in the bylaws. And one of the problems that they have to solve is that it's different level among the different participants from the different countries in the GAC. And it's they have difficulties to take decisions while they are there. They need much more time to go home and consult their government to be able to give an answer to things that perhaps we need an answer much earlier. And that is a problem also in the PDP process, because they don't have the same time as a lot of us that only work with this. So that's a challenge.
Thank you. If I may only add that I think it's more like an evolving process of government participation and learning process as well on how to interact among different stakeholder groups, right? So governments, I can speak of my own experience because before joining ICANN, I was working for the Mexican government for almost 12 years and actually with some participation at the GAC as well. So governments are normally used to interact with other governments and intergovernmental fora, right? So they feel more or less in this comfort zone doing that. But when they join the GAC, and they, of course, start interacting within the GAC with other governments, but then they realize that they should also talk and dialogue with other stakeholder groups, whether it's the ALAC or the CCNSO, the other guys from the technical community. So, and this is a learning process for everybody. And I think the GAC has, as you mentioned, right, really realize or are in the process of doing that, what's their place in this and how influential they are as an advisory committee, right? They're not a supporting organization, they're an advisory committee, but with a very powerful advice in the public interest issues, right? And this is very well needed because if you look at the structure of ICANN, each one of the SACs or SOs will pursue their own interest. That's perfect. This is what they're for. But nobody is really looking horizontally at the public interest. So that's where the GAC comes in. And just to conclude this comment, in terms of engagement, I can share with you this. We are now close to 170 governments at the GAC, which is very close to what happens in the United Nations. It's 190, 200. In Latin America and the Caribbean, when I started working in ICANN 6 years ago, there were only 7 out of 35, and now we are only missing 7. And these are, small islands. So, and there's a lot of explanation of what's happening, and the transition was one of the issues that brought the attention of many, and now they are participating on a regular basis. But and the processes and all platforms that the GAC has built, I think has made a better place for governments to discuss these issues.
Thank you. Annabeth, in your opening remarks, you had talked about how there are challenges for stakeholders like you who come from smaller countries to participate in international fora like ICANN. I'd like to hear from each of the panelists what you see as the challenges to engage that broader community who's coming into the fold with us. What barriers are they facing to be fully engaged in the multi-stakeholder process? Because the multi-stakeholder process really lives or dies on engagement, right? It is fundamental. And if we could talk a bit about what are those barriers and what are some possible ways that we can work to overcome those barriers. I'll start on my left.
Oh, sure. I know that sometimes it's perceived that industry or commercial players, particularly those in the domain name industry, have an easier time participating in ICANN, and I don't know that that's true. I know we face a number of challenges just like any others. So first, there's the time commitment. We talk a lot about volunteer overload and just managing to cover all of these different work streams. I think that's universal, though. I think that goes from governments and civil society and the private sector. I will say that it's challenging as a for-profit organization and a public for-profit organization to be able to draw a straight line between the work that I'm doing or that we're doing in these forums to something that benefits our customers, something that benefits our shareholders, something that benefits the people that sent us there. It is challenging to make that case, and I always go back to, it wasn't on this trip, but on a previous trip, someone from the TSA noticed my luggage tag and said, "Oh, GoDaddy, I'm a customer, I love GoDaddy, and it's great. I love running into customers." And then we talk a little bit, and sometimes they have questions, but the question I always hate to get is, what do you do for them? Or what are you doing in Helsinki, or something like that? That's a tougher question to answer, and you want to try to be able to explain it in such a way of how I'm working for them to ensure that they have access to the internet tools and services and systems and platforms, the same as anybody else, the same as a large company or a small company or even a government or a school. I think there's another aspect is opportunity costs. When I'm pulling people, subject matter experts, technical experts into ICANN issues, I'm pulling them away from their real work, which actually drives revenue, drives profit. But then the other challenge, it's kind of difficult to articulate, but it's something along the lines of, in an unregulated space, we're free to innovate. Some players are going to do bad things, some players are going to fail. But some players are going to do some really interesting things that nobody has thought of before. And I think when you bring about a regulation, you create standards. And standards can be a good thing. They ensure interoperability and efficiencies, but they also narrow the playing field a little bit so that it's like constraining an artist or a musician into what they can and cannot create. And I think that we need to be mindful that sometimes we are tying the hands of folks to try new things. And this comes up a lot from a registrar perspective, and maybe registries. This comes up a lot in transfers. We'll get a new product manager that'll come in and say, "James, customers hate transfers. They hate transfers, domain names. It's really difficult. It's confusing. We have all these help files and all these people helping them, but they still fail at an unacceptably high rate. I have a really great idea for a new way that we can do transfers, and I have to be the person that throws the wet blanket and says, no, we can't do that, see, because ICANN wants us to follow this checklist, to follow this recipe, and we can't deviate from it, or or Rodrigo's colleagues will come down on us. So I think that's a hard way to say that that there is a balance between regulation and innovation, and we can go too far in either direction, and that is a barrier to or a challenge for commercial groups to participating in ICANN.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much. And of course, big companies probably have corporate social responsibility departments and can do all sorts of things. So I'm particularly concerned about the smaller players, or the less well-endowed, or those who are not used to this or don't have the resources. And so one of the things we've done in the European Commission is create something called the Global Internet Policy Observatory, which is still not finally rolled out. There's a beta version. And the idea is that it's an automated system which will allow everyone, but the intention, of course, is to help primarily less well-endowed participants, and to encourage more participants, especially from developing countries, civil society, smaller companies, etc., to have a better understanding of what's going on in internet governance writ large. So that includes everything: ICANN, IETF, IGF, etc. And so we're very hopeful that this tool will be very useful. We're hoping that someone like, or something like the IGF or someone else will take it over at the end of next year to really run it as a international public resource. So I think this is one thing that's very helpful. And then the other is just spreading the word and helping each other, which sounds really corny, but unfortunately, that's what a lot of it is about. And to be perfectly frank, are we on Chatham House rules? Oh, well, I don't mind. You can tweet it if you like. You just don't say I said it. One thing that... yeah. Spell it with an E like the car. One thing I've noticed a lot is that we tend to speak to limited groups. And it's a little bit an old boys network. If you go to an ICANN meeting for the first time, you think, oh my goodness, these people all know each other. They've been talking to each other the same thing. They know every detail. They're picking up conversations from one thing. It's the same at the IGF. It's the same at others. And I think for newcomers, it's sometimes hard to break into those groups, which is not to say that they're closed circles, but I think we all have to do a bit more to expand these groups, and also not make sure that physical meetings like this are the only way that we participate. So we have to find also other ways to bring other people in, and I'm sure through the internet and through ICTs there are more and better ways, and there will be even more in the future.
I agree that you have to find other forums that you can share and try to include, especially young people. And one of the things we do in Norway is that we have continued with a special Monday club for students at the Institute for Computer and Law, which was established by Professor John Bing, that some of you might know. He was in the GNSO in connection with the old new GTLD process. He died, and this initiative died with him. And then we, NORID, picked it up, and we have started to gather young people interested in this field in our offices once a month, to have a social event and also to tell them about what's going on. Even if they can't go to ICANN meetings or center meetings, they can get interested in the field, and they can then apply for some of your funding, of course. And one more thing, my first ICANN meeting, I didn't know a soul, and I didn't really know what was going on. And after the first day in the GAC, I just went away, and it was a dinner, and nobody had told me that it was something going on in the afternoon. Nobody talked to me. And I think it's really important, and I try to do that in my way of acting when I'm here, from that point, that when you people come to your group or to society take care of them. Invite them in and share what you, both your social things and also all the things of experience that you know. In this way, we can, a lot of people here are not staying here forever, and then it's important that we get new people into this business with us to understand what we are doing. And I will repeat, use the regional organizations for those small with small resources and if they can't go to the meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, and I definitely agree with this scheme of making use of these regional organizations. We in ICANN work very closely with LAC-TLD, with Eduardo and Andres, to make outreach with technical community. Of course, with the CCTLD community in this focus, but also for other internal governance events, we coordinate with them. We just signed an MOU with them, and this is very useful because there are very small registries, right, in the CCTLDs, but 3 people operating a registry with very few resources. And LAC-TLD makes an excellent job in making summaries of what happened at the meetings, raising the issue. They have capacity building initiatives, because I want to take it from there, because one of the barriers, besides resources, is really how well do you understand the things that are happening there. You might have stakes in the issues, but since you don't understand them fully, then you cannot participate appropriately, right? This happens basically for small direct stakeholders like CCTLDs. This is one very good example. Also from the perspective of not only Latin America and the Caribbean, but developing regions, we have, or until now, very few registries, generic, right? GTLDs, very few, only until the new GTLD program. Of course, in the CCTLDs, we have most of them or all of them. But then the issue for these developing regions is creating the stakes, right? So in the case of GoDaddy or other registrars or registries, they have direct stakes. I mean, they are changing the rules that operate their business, so they have a direct impact. So if you look at the map, right, and of the current representation in the GNSO, you will find out that it's a huge concentration of people from the developed world, right? North America, Europe, some from Asia, but others, they are not there. And the problem is that the problem is not that they don't want to go. The problem is that we didn't have any. So there's still opportunities to develop this industry. There are some accredited registrars from the Latin American Caribbean region, very few new GTLDs. But I mean, it doesn't match the usual number that this region represents as a region in the world for other purposes. Latin America and the Caribbean is more or less 10% of everything: population, growth, even domain name registration. But we don't have. We have 16 ICANN accredited registrars in this region, out of close to 1,000, more or less, or probably more than that, around those numbers. So it's not our 10%. So what's happening with the rest 90? So is there any sort of other barriers that may be keeping them from participating in this industry? We're working with the community, also trying to find out, for the case of Latin America and also in Egypt and in Africa, making some studies to understand what's going on and what we should change as a community to try to bring them also into the table, but starting from creating the stakes so that eventually they can join you guys in the registries and registrars group. No? And I can go on with examples of each stakeholder group. It's more or less these kind of challenges, not only resources, it's capacity building and creating also stakes, no, to some extent.
Sorry to jump in. I just wanted to add one small thing to more advertising, sorry. And that is, I said also that we all have a responsibility and a role to play in expanding our stakeholder groups. And I just wanted to use the example of Center, which almost always invites some government stakeholders and others to their meetings. And we also in Europe have something called the High-Level Internet Governance Group, which is now a multi-stakeholder group, and so it's not perfect, but it does include industry, civil society. We try to include members of the European Parliament, etc. And we try to have a number of these events or exchanges. So I think something that Rodrigo and a couple of the others have said too is the importance of doing this also at a regional or local level. I can't emphasize that more. I think this helps to build knowledge and understanding, and that spreads and creates waves as well.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on something that Rodrigo mentioned because as a registrar, it's something we've noticed very starkly, particularly when it comes time for us to elect new officers, because we have written in our charter that we try to balance all of our leadership teams according to geographic regions. And we've always struggled outside of North America and Europe to find eligible candidates to fill some of those slots. One of the things I will point out, it's not really a counter to any of the points you made, it's just more data, is that we also have a large number of resellers in Latin America and Africa and Asia Pacific. So we found that in some of these regions it's more attractive to be a reseller than to accredit directly with ICANN. And why would that be? And one of the answers that we get is because the resellers don't want to necessarily wade in to the regulatory environment. They would prefer to outsource that to an accredited registrar. So in some regards, it is the path of least resistance to standing up a new company in the industry. And I think it is something that we should be thinking about when we talk about the changing, growing, and increasingly complex regulatory environment that some are just opting out, both in developing areas of the world and in the new entrants in North America and Europe are just saying, I'll let a registrar deal with that. They know what they're doing. I'll just be a reseller. That's what I want to focus on.
I have one more question before I open it up to the floor, but I think we all agree that ICANN, the IGF, the IETF can be very intimidating for newcomers, and we're all, Western Europe, North American, South American. We all have a very good command of the English language. I'm thinking about, we're adding a few billion more people to the internet, many of whom come from parts of the world that may not have the same philosophical and political underpinnings that we share. How do we make internet governance fora welcoming to those people while being able to maintain those aspects of the multi-stakeholder model that have made it so successful to date?
I think that starting with just languages would help. I mean, GAC does a very good job. I'm not supposed to say this either, but there's interpretation at every one of the GAC meetings into about, well, at least the UN languages, and I think plus one. Plus Portuguese. How could I forget Portuguese? Of course. But quite frankly, it's not used probably as much as it should be. The discussions tend to be really in English, but the interpretation is there, so people can at least listen and passively. And also, I think it's important for the distance participants that they can listen in another language. So I think that's already one very important thing. The IGF doesn't seem to do it quite as well. In Brazil, and I'm sure in Mexico this year, we'll have lots of Spanish. In Brazil, there's usually some Portuguese interpretation. But I think this is an area where, again, the local and regional activities can really help. And one point, again, another commercial break, is on the JIPO, which I mentioned, the Global Internet Policy Observatory that we're developing. Again, for the moment, it's only in English, but of course, other mainstream languages, French, Spanish, etc., will come on at some point. But I think, again, this regional, local activities.
I just wanted to amplify Megan's points about languages. It's very important. I'm going to pick on ICANN just a little bit here. The critical agreements that we have are in English. When we were rolling out the 2013 Registrar Accreditation Agreement, myself and some of your colleagues from ICANN and another registrar went to China to present that agreement. And one of the first questions from the floor is, when can we see a Chinese version of this contract? Which was shocking to me that we had gotten that far in the process without. I know that translation is also expensive. Having seen some of the cost breakdowns for some of the cross-community working groups and review teams, translation can be, after travel and staff support, translation can be one of the highest cost drivers, particularly when you're doing it in 6 languages and only 2 of them have someone tuned to that channel on the translation. So it's a hit or miss exercise, but it is important to helping to lower those barriers of participation.
I would follow up on the language question as well. It's a good thing that it's translation, but it it will always be a lot of countries that will not have their language translated. And we all know that even if you speak English, it's more difficult to think in nuances and get the small points. So a real good advice to those who have English as their mother tongue is to think that it's a lot of people out there that don't catch it if you talk too fast. A lot of people in their own language has a tendency to speak too fast. And then it's more difficult for foreigners to understand. So that's a good advice to those of you who have English as a mother language. I just wanted to say one more thing about that participation thing. A little advertising that as well is for the European Summer School in Meissen, which also has been extended to Latin America. Yeah. And we've been sponsoring that for 10 years, and it's a really, really good thing. And young people from all parts of the world are taking part of that school, are together for 1 week, and learn everything about the multi-stakeholder and all the different constituencies. And they have a set of people, when they come to their first ICANN meeting, they know a lot of people. So thanks to Wolfgang Kleinrichter that started this. It was really good.
And I'll just add that the first time I met Annabeth was when I was a student at the European Summer School on Internet Governance.
So if I may add that, I mean, this is language related, but not in UN languages. This is also the problem of speaking ICANNese, right? So if even if you speak English, if you go for the first time into a meeting room, they will say, the folks from the CCNSO are reviewing the SSAC document that was just released for the GAC to meet with. So you turn the channel to, is this English, really? It's not, it's ICANNese, right? So we are a part of the community, we understand, but for newcomers, it's not really that friendly, if you think about it, right? So you know about this program, the fellowship program. These programs and the Next Gen and others try to be more friendly in this regard, right? So the fellows will come for a full week, and during the mornings, they don't go out to each of the rooms, meeting rooms. The people from the different ACs and SOs will come to meet with them and explain them in a very simple English or Spanish or whatever, not ICANNese, how things work. Because otherwise, it's a natural barrier. So it's language, but I mean, in a global issue, any global fora has the issue of languages. But this is also technical. And the complexity, not only of the subjects being discussed, but the complexity of the different interactions that happen between the different stakeholder groups, how they interact, when is they're going to take the decision, when is that going to the board. And now, with the new mechanisms, it's going to be even trickier. So we need to, as a community, think, and of course, with the support of the staff of the organization, how to make things easier for everybody to jump in.
So Rodrigo, just, sorry, another story. My very first ICANN meeting was at a very crowded hotel, first day, and I didn't know anyone, and it was breakfast, and it was too busy, and so they were lining us up, and they were saying, you know, if you were all by yourself, they had to put you with a table with someone else. And they put me at a table with someone else for breakfast. Day one, first ICANN meeting, they sat me with Becky Burr. And I'm just, and so maybe the fellowship program, what it should be is like, you should just assign them to, you've been in ICANN, this is your 30th, whatever, you've got the pin, you know, how many ICANN meetings you've been, you're going to take on a fellowship person for the week. And they're going to help you, you know, maybe that'll help lower some of the barriers, because I learned more in that breakfast probably than probably the first couple of ICANN meetings thereafter.
Yeah, that's a great idea. A shameless plug for ISOC has a fellowship program for the IGF as well. Are there any questions from the floor in the back there?
Afternoon, my name is Fiona Songa from Kenya, and here through the PIR Advisory Council. I believe that for a multi-stakeholder model to work, it has to be relevant. It has to address the needs of all the stakeholders. And therefore, my question goes to the registrars in the room, represented by GoDaddy and ICANN. Coming from a region where the process of adoption has been slower, there is a need for registrars to work with governments, and therefore the governments must come to you as a block because it is easier for you to get the agreement with them. Because if, say, the 54 African countries come to you as GoDaddy one by one, it becomes a bit of a hassle and a pain, and then they want to go to all the other registrars as well. So coming as a block, working as a block becomes very important when they are addressing needs of the community, which normally is represented at ELAC, but even at ELAC at large, we do not have the appropriate representation of the regions. So what my question is, what would and how would ICANN and the registrars work together to ensure that the IP rights that are our cultural heritage are protected even as we go into the new GTLD processes and in the entire domain name system? Because it's easy to sit here and talk about all the things you can do because in your environment, things work. In my environment, they don't work. So if we are all going to be part of this multi-stakeholder model, we need to find a way, a middle ground where everything works for all of us. And the most important thing that we are at risk of losing right now, because registrars are not working appropriately with our governments, is our cultural heritage IP rights. And so I would like to know what plans GoDaddy has, specifically because a lot of domains are bought over the GoDaddy platform. It's easy to transact, and it's easy for us to acquire them from our region, and also to know what ICANN is doing with the governments and the registrar community to ensure that our heritage IP rights are protected.
So I guess I'm not as familiar with the issue. Are you saying that, first of all, thank you that it's easy to transact on the GoDaddy platform. We've worked very hard, not only to make it easy, but to also support multiple languages and currencies and to localize that experience. But I guess I'm not clear on governments acting. I'm not aware of any government requests to registrars specifically. Are you talking about specific strings that are culturally protected, or?
No. There has been no request from governments, partly because our governments probably have their priorities differently when it comes to IT issues. Access may be a higher priority than the IP rights and IP concerns. And so then there's a need for you from a more developed region, seeing the importance of that and making an approach, or through ICANN, getting the governments from the developing countries to pay attention to the intellectual property heritage concerns that they need to protect. I'm looking at the case of Amazon, for example, and thinking of what if, say, Maasai, Kenya is very famous for the Maasai or the Maasai Mara. If someone went on to GoDaddy, it's so easy to get it. But how does the Kenyan government, for example, work with the registrars or work with ICANN? How do the governments, through ICANN, because that is the place that is most central for all of them, and it's also central for the registrars, how do you work with the governments together to have an appropriate policy that will facilitate and then educate the GAC representatives on it? Because I know that there has been some traction in that direction. The only challenge is when you go down to the ground and are engaging the government officials, they have no idea. So there's a part of it which ICANN needs to do in terms of awareness within the GAC and the GAC representatives of the developing regions. And there is also a part of it that comes from registrars taking on initiative and just reaching out to give guidance or awareness or to advice that will help protect heritage intellectual property of regions.
Can I take it? So first of all, thank you for the question, because this will allow me to explain many things I have in mind. And I see, I mean, just to try to focus on the two questions, I see two different kind of documents that might have or provide the framework for this. So one, I believe in terms of IP discussions, and this is more at the registry level than at the registrar level, are provided as protections within the rules, right, of the new GTLD program when they applied, and all these processes. The other document or set of documents are the different kind of agreements that have ICANN with registries, with registrars, and between them, and they do have some provisions for that. But the other most important question is exactly what you mentioned. How can we make different governments participate in all parts of the process? It was mentioned before, at what moment the GAC should be involved in many different processes or the governments, and probably not only at the end when this is done. I'm sure this is changing. More and more the GAC is involved even in these documents that are discussed via the PDPs, right? The policy development process at ICANN, which are at many stages open not only to the community but also to the public. But then how do we get the attention of these governments in developing regions to participate actively in this? Because once the rules are out, right, like the new GTLD program or the contracts, that happen. But the beauty or the good thing about the multi-stakeholder model in a bottom-up approach is that they can participate when they are designing the rules. But probably for some rules, some of them, they are coming late, right, because they are not engaged. But this is why it's critical to have everybody with a seat in the table from every part of the world, so that they can capture these concerns whenever they write the rules for a new GTLD program, whenever they are reviewing the registrar agreement or the registry, what are the rights or obligations of registrants, etc. And this is open. It has always been open. So, but we have a challenge. We have a challenge because we haven't been able to involve and engage everybody that needs to be engaged, which is the case now of the governments in Africa.
Thank you. I had a hand at the second table on my left, and then the first table on my left.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion, and you're so experienced, all of you. And sometimes I hear the word fatigue. What do we do to keep the old ones? Do you have any comments on that?
Fatigue. Fatigue of, yeah.
I think what you mean, it's been touched here, that it's a lot of working groups, and it's a lot of the same people sitting in these working groups, and an immense time-consuming meetings and teleconferences late at night, early in the morning, and it's the same people participating and not the least talking, even if it's a lot of people signing up for the working group. It's about 5-6 people at the most that are participating actively. And we would like to do much more than we actually have a capacity to do, even if you work hard. And the fatigue creeps in when it's steadily new working groups. And after the IANA transition process, a lot of people have worked so hard, so many hours, so many nights. And those people are among the most competent people in the community. And if they say that, oh, I can't do another round, I don't want to do this now, I have to have a break, then we have a problem. So sign up, be engaged, and try to share the work between you so we don't tire out competent people in our community.
And at times, I think it goes beyond fatigue. Like James was saying, it's sometimes hard to justify the resource allocation to these things when, we've just spent the last 2 years with an exceptional amount of work with the IANA transition. I'm sure there are many organizations that are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is really taking up a lot of our time that could be spent doing other things closer to our bottom line.
Yeah, no more plane tickets for you, is what they usually say. And it's an excellent point in terms of fatigue. I would just put out the other item is that you seem to spend a lot of your time working on the same issues over and over. It's like a merry-go-round. I think one of the better sayings I heard, it was outside of ICANN, it was in a different context, I went through school and I was taught that projects had a beginning and a middle and an end, but I've seemed to have spent my entire career in the middle. I came too late for the beginning, and I won't be here to see the end. And so you feel like one of those multi-generational people building cathedrals where, you didn't lay the foundation and you won't go inside, but you're laying bricks every day, hoping, to make progress. And so I think that's probably the source of the fatigue, is just, trying to move the issue forward, but knowing it's going to come up again.
Can I just add one minor point to that? And that is, I think it's in quality assurance, in these ISO standards that you have for quality assurance. Don't they say, get it right the first time and just do it once? So maybe we need to introduce some more quality standards in what we do, because I'm partly fatigued because I hear the same thing over and over again. I think, we're not just in the middle, it's a merry-go-round, and we keep saying the same thing over and over again. So I would really like to, maybe I'm a bit impatient, it's because I'm old as well. I'd like to see, some of the processes improved a bit as well.
We had a question at the first table here. Oh,
I had my hand up. I got the microphone, so I think I'll use it. Name is Aubrey Doria. I wasn't going to ask about fatigue. The cure for fatigue is just realize you're addicted to it and go with it. The question I was going to ask actually goes back to Fiona's question. And it's not only new people, it's not only getting people involved, it's issues that aren't even recognized when they're mentioned. For example, the whole notion of cultural heritage, intellectual property. Now, we come into ICANN or any of these places, you say intellectual property, and it's immediately that well-developed notion of things that, you've written down on a piece of paper and registered with some government somewhere. For close to the 10, 15 years I've been involved in ICANN, periodically the notion of how do we deal with cultural heritage has been mentioned by someone. And there's always some kind of answer about, yes, getting involved, talking to governments, etc. But then the issue never really happens. And it's not the only issue like that. There are these periodic issues that people come, they bring the issue, and we hear it. I bet you half the time most of us don't even really know what cultural heritage, intellectual property means as a concept, and then we move on doing our really important work. And so one of the things that's always sort of bothered me is that we don't figure out how to bring that stuff in, how to get the new concepts into the old heads and such. So that's really one of the things I wanted to sort of come back, because after it got mentioned, we had a bunch of answers, but cultural heritage, intellectual property as a notion, unless I missed it, wasn't part of any of the answers. And so that's why I wanted to get up. And since I'm well known for being obnoxious, I figured it was a thing I could do. Thanks.
thank you, Avery. We had a hand up at the first table here, but just to recognize that, I think sometimes it's a question of getting the right people to the meetings, because there are many people in governments who are working on intellectual property rights issues at the Convention on Biological Diversity, at WIPO, and at all of these other international fora who have no idea that ICANN or the IGF exists, but they're the ones with the knowledge of their country's positions, of indigenous people's positions going into those discussions.
Can I weigh in on that, Mark? Go ahead.
Avery, and this is kind of an answer to, I hope, but when you talk about intellectual property rights, it's nothing like you have to register somewhere. It's more like it's rights that's not registered in a trade registry. So I have some of the same problem when I'm working in the working group for country and territory names. It's about the same, because this has to do with feelings and what you feel belong to your country or your region or your group of people or whatever. And it's what I meet in many of these discussions is that, well, no one has the right to own this. Therefore, we can take it. No protection, nothing. And I feel that that is the wrong attitude. because I can enter into a contract with those applying for a new GTLD, and it's up to ICANN to decide is the values of these names, even if it's cultural rights, political rights, names of countries and whatever, that some feel a really attachment to, and it's a kind of identity, but it's not no legal right. But this is politics and policy, not legal rights. It's not law. So I think ICANN will do wisely in listening to these concerns that comes from several groups in the community.
We don't have a lot of time left, and I know Jim has been.
Mark, could I just
very-
follow up on one?
Sure.
Briefly, I'm
And then-
sorry to jump in, but to Avri's point, I'm actually going to give you an answer. First of all, I'm one of the people who does not understand cultural heritage intellectual rights. But as a registrar, it sounds like what you want me to do is to say I will not release certain strings to anyone, or I will not release them to the wrong people or wrong groups, or something, and that ICANN should put something to that effect in the contract. And I would say to you that, first of all, not a registrar, not most private sector folks are going to do that voluntarily. They need to be told to do it. They need to be told what those strings are. They need to be told who the right people are. And this is now the political and policy discussion that we're having. But from my perspective, it is this string is up for grabs for anyone who wants it. This string is reserved, cannot release it under any circumstances, and this string is only available to certain people under certain conditions. Give me those answers and we'll follow those answers. But for right now, we tend to, in the absence of that guidance, almost everything is available to anyone. And I think that is the kind of the status quo, unless we are told otherwise by a rule set. So I guess you singled out GoDaddy here, and I want to say the private sector is not going to come to a government and say, I have an idea for all these voluntary things I can do to myself that might serve your interest. That's not, that's kind of, what really should happen is that the governments, I think, should work through ICANN and say, we have a case to be made for this, these restrictions or these regulations, and then we will follow them.
But,
But the
therein
GAC
lies the
early
beauty of the
warning.
multi-stakeholder model, right?
Exactly.
Because all of the stakeholders, all of the individuals and organizations who have a stake in it will be at the table and will come to the better decision, right?
Right, and we would not be absent from that conversation. But I'm just saying that we would not initiate the thank you.
Excellent. Jim.
Yeah, so Jim Prendergast, Galway Strategy Group. James, to pick up on your initial story about having breakfast with Becky Burr, my first meeting sat at one of those Japanese teppanyaki things where the chef cooks at the flat top, and the person next to me says, so what questions do you have about ICANN? And it was Chuck Gomes. So I think he could have spoken to me for a week. Earlier, we were talking a little bit about the disconnect between sometimes what the GAC is seeing and what the rest of the community is seeing. And I want to highlight, I think, some improvements that have been made recently that I think are helping break down some of those silos. We've had a GNSO liaison to the GAC for the last couple of years. I think that's still in its formative stages. We've only been through 1 or 2 cycles, but I think it's an early warning system for the GAC that these are the issues that are coming up, so please engage early. And it's an early warning for the policymaking community that there are some concerns from the GAC, so it's hopefully a two-way street. But I thought the change in the format at the Helsinki meeting this past summer, where everybody got together with the GAC and sort of explained what they were working on and what they were doing, went a long way in educating the GAC about some of these issues that you generally wouldn't hear about until it's too late. I saw some eyes open, some heads nod, and some questions that came from members of the GAC that really showed that they were taking in what they were hearing and processing it and understanding it and wanting to engage. So I know we only do that once a year in this new Meeting B format or policy form. But I think, from looking forward to a 7-day meeting we have in Hyderabad, we got lots of time. Let's figure out a way to have more of those interactions, not just between the GAC and the GNSO, but other parts of the community so that we can better understand some of the issues that we may not be familiar with, such as what you had raised.
Jim, thanks for reminding us of those mechanisms. There's a third one too, which is the GNSO now typically responds to a GAC communique with an analysis of the policy implications in the communique. And I think in some cases that might be where the GAC was not aware that one of their concerns or something that showed up in the communique was perhaps related to or encompassed within ongoing policy development work in the GNSO. So helping to kind of close that gap and show those connections, I think, is a step in the right direction. We'll see about the other two, the quick look and the liaison. I have high hopes that that's also going to help bridge those differences.
Can I make one small proposal as well? You've all talked about the benefit of breakfast. So maybe a trick too is for those of you who have issues that for which you want to pass messages, organize, it doesn't have to be breakfast, coffee, whatever it is, and force people to talk to each other who don't normally talk to each other. I think that's a good way to do it. You make it half an hour, and you get a lot of exchanges.
I think the rule is at the next ICANN meeting, if you see someone sitting alone, sit with them. We have time for one more question. We have a hand in the back.
Hi, my name's Tom McKenzie. I'm actually here with the PIR. I'm part of the AC of the .org. But I was very interested in your conversation today because at the same time I'm part of a team which is doing the organizational review of the ICANN at large community. And so you were mentioning a lot of the kind of issues that we've been thinking about for the past month and a half or so since we started this review process. Some of the criticisms that we've heard from the people that we've been talking to are that many of the constituencies within ICANN are made up of individuals and the representatives of organizations who've been talking to each other for so long that they've actually developed their own kind of language which no one else understands. And they've sort of excluded themselves from the rest of the community. And so the challenge, I guess, that they have put to us with this review is to say, how can we make sure that we really are engaging, we can reform this at-large part of the ICANN system in such a way that ordinary end users will be able to get involved much more easily. And so finally, I just wanted to make a quick plug for a survey that we have started, we opened just yesterday, as part of this review process. And all you on the panel, and I think lots of people here, have got lots of very good ideas about how these kinds of organizations, this particular part of the ICANN system could be reformed. And so if I could encourage you to go and have a look at that survey, you'll find the link to it very easily on ICANN web pages, and in particular the at-large section of ICANN. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists and all of you for your excellent questions.